Hi, my name is Paolo. I'm a photographer in Charleston, South Carolina. And today I'd like to talk to you about this weird device. Let me see if I can show you. Yeah. This is called the ChromaDisk chart by DSC Labs. Now, DSC is a very well-known company in the movie and video production. I think there is a chart of one of their charts in any production, any video production I've seen. Often there are charts like this. This is the calibration video calibration chart. There are of all kinds of sizes. Now, DSC is a fantastic company to work with. They are extremely accurate. Their gray chart, their gray area here is absolutely guaranteed to be completely neutral. Their calibration is the strictest in the field. And the funny thing is that their charts often feature multiple functions in one single chart, which is awesome. So if we look at this strange thing, now you can see that there is a spiral in the middle. This spiral has actually a name. It's called fiddleheads or fiddlehead spiral. Okay, and we will see in a few minutes what it's used for. And then you see that there are some color charts. Now these colors are very, very specific. They're designed to trigger several points in a vector scope. And here we have some skin tones. And again, these are designed to create a certain response on a vector scope so that you can calibrate the camera. Now, camera calibration is very common in the video and motion pictures field. It's not quite as commonplace with the still photography cameras. Can be still done and it should be done. But today I'd like to talk to you about some very specific features of this chart. Because with the resurgence of vintage lenses like this, for example, or this. So this is a Minolta 50mm. This is a Pentax Super Takumar 50mm lens. And right now I'm shooting this with a early 90s Leica Summicron 50mm. And it is mounted on a Sony Alpha 7 Mark III. So there's a lot of interest for lenses, for vintage lenses, and I like them a lot. You can see from my gray hair, I wasn't born in this millennium, and I grew up with lenses like this. Now, I grew up in the 70s. Manual lenses were what we had at that time with film. So I have a kind of a nostalgic attachment to these lenses, and I have to tell you the truth. To me, even though electronic lenses are very convenient, to me there is nothing like grabbing the aperture ring and just turn it and say, all right, we're gonna go to 5.6. It's just, I don't know, to me it's a more natural way of shooting. So I do like using vintage lenses. There is a budget benefit in doing that because we can buy pretty good prime lenses for a very modest investment. So, but there is one thing here. These lenses vary a lot. There is a lot of changes from one lens to the other. Actually, in the same lens type, different copies can be quite different. Now, today I don't want to talk about the artistic part of the business. I want to talk about the technical part of the business. Because when you buy a lens, you should know what you're buying, or at least you should verify what you bought. And how do we do that? How can we verify with absolute precision what we have? And how can we compare one thing with the other? Now, artistic considerations aside, we want to know, at least I want to know, a couple of different things. First of all, if I have a lens like this, and this is a f1.4. By the way, this is the 8-element non-radioactive Super Takumar 50 millimeter. So f1.4, can I use it at 1.4? Because there are times when you're using a lens and because of several circumstances, you are not completely certain if you missed focus because of something in the lens, something in the camera, or just because you didn't have, a firm grasp on the camera, the camera wasn't stabilized enough. There are points where we don't know if it's a technical issue or a user error. And we want to make sure that those doubts are gone. So this is where this chart really comes in place. Now, full disclosure, DSC sent me this chart. They don't pay me to do this video. And so they just sent it to me to review because in the past years, I've done some other reviews of their charts and I showed how to use them. And so this is just a tutorial, an instructional video on how to use this chart. And you decide if this is worth your investment. For me, it is. It really opened up my eyes on how these lenses perform. So I have a Minolta Rockor X PF 1.7 50 millimeter, and I have the Super Takumar. Also, I have this interesting little thing. This is actually, this barrel here is the adapter. The lens itself is just this piece here. And I want to test this one because this is the first lens I ever used. This was on my Retina, Kodak Retina S3, and this lens is made by Schneider Kreuznach, and it is an f2.8. With this adapter, I can use it on my Sony Alpha 7. So, how do these lenses perform? Can we use them at the full aperture or not? And how do they compare? So, there is an important thing to understand. So, we look at this chart and we look at the spiral. Why is there a spiral there? This spiral has an important design. It looks like a perfectly smooth spiral, and it is. It is a perfect continuous curve. But when you have that spiral in perfect focus using peaking on your camera, there are two things that happen. In the middle of the spiral here, you'll see two opposing triangles. So the peaking will show itself as two opposing triangles. It's like a bow tie pattern. And these lines here, which look perfectly smooth, will actually look with a stair-stepping pattern. It's an aliasing effect. Again, this is by using peaking. Now, peaking is a feature that has been in video cameras for ages, and it's kind of trickling down on mirrorless cameras more recently. I was able to use peaking with my Canon 6D after installing Magic Lantern, which provides that feature, which drives me nuts because I'm thinking, why didn't Canon implement that feature if it was possible? It's incredibly useful. If you're trying to manual focus a lens, peaking is the way to go. Even if you have autofocus, many times there are situations when you want to use your lens in manual focus. And so peaking is extremely useful in that situation, especially if you have a larger monitor attached to the camera. But even by looking inside the viewfinder, you can achieve very good focus if you know that the lens is capable of doing that job at that aperture. So by opening the lens at the widest and focusing on the spiral, then we see the two effects, the bow tie pattern and the stair stepping on the spiral. At that point, we know that that lens is perfectly in focus. That is an absolute measurement. And that is why we need a chart. We don't need a chart for anything else but to be capable of having an absolute reference. What does that mean? Absolute means that it's not subjective. Different photographers have different eyes and different capabilities. If we rely on our naked eye, sometimes it might work or sometimes it may not. It is subjective. It's not scientific anymore. So by having a tool that gives us a measurement that can be recreated every single time with precision, we have an absolute non-subjective reference, something that we can use as a standing point, as a fixed point to then measure the rest. What do we need to measure? Well, if you notice on the side of the chart, right here, right here, right here. So these are all resolution lines. So once I open a lens at the widest, then I look on the finest, this line here, on the finest line. And you notice that this pattern, this side here, is actually split in two. This part here has coarser lines and this part here has finer lines. So by focusing the lens on the center of the chart, then I'm able to look at those fine lines and check if they resolve and a certain clarity. Once you take a picture of that chart with two different lenses, as I'm showing you in this video, then you will be able to see the effects of each lens when it is in focus. Now, for the purpose of this test, I wanted to check two different conditions. One was the lens at the maximum aperture. So if I want to use this lens at 1.7, because it does say it gets a 1.7, so I'll go to my maximum aperture here of 1.7. Great. Can I use it? Well, the answer is no. Hell no. Why? Because I tested it and it is super blurry. It's not super blurry because I was handling the camera in the wrong way, or because I was shaking, or because there was some lighting condition. No, this is like a 1.7. It's like I put a filter here and I smear it with Vaseline. It's that blurry. So now I know. It's not like, okay, I'm supposed to use this lens at 1.7. I try and then I see that my subject is always out of focus and I'm thinking, oh my God, what I did wrong. No, the lens just doesn't perform an absolute reference. Well, get this, from 1.7, it goes to 2.8, nothing in between, which is kind of a strange thing, but okay. So at 2.8, I did the same measurement and actually works. So if I want this kind of lens with its own character, we'll get to that in a second, I'll know that as long as I use a 2.8, I'm good, I'm golden, okay? Its own character, what I mean by that? Well, I measured this lens against the Leica, against the Super Takumar, against the Schneider Kreuznach, and I noticed one thing, because I have these color swatches here, I'm able to do an objective measurement of saturation and color rendition between lens and lens. Great. So I noticed that this lens, while I kept the lighting and everything else exactly the same, has much more saturated, brilliant colors, which is a known fact. It is a known characteristic of this kind of lenses, of the Minolta rocker lenses of the era. They are known for that. Well, I was able to actually verify that feature, that behavior on my own copy. Excellent. Now I know. If I want to use a 2.8, this is a good lens. This, it is fairly famous as a lens, the famous 50mm Super Takumar Pentax lens. Well, again, at 1.4, it's a disaster, incredibly blurry. Stopped down a couple of times at 2.0 and 2.8 actually, I see a much, much bigger improvement. And again, that is something I can verify. Now, the funny thing is this. This lens, which is, this little thing on a 1958 camera, this is not famous as, as a particularly interesting vintage lens. It's just nostalgia in action totally for me. I was surprised to see that at 2.8, this is 2.8 as maximum aperture, wide open, this lens is actually usable. This, not so much. Much modern lens. This is from the 70s, if I remember well. Wide open, this lens is garbage. Wide open, this lens is actually okay. It's not quite as nice as the others once that you put them in the right situation, but it's perfectly fine. So then I did another test. I decided to look at the performance of each lens at 2.8. And then I measure each lens using 2.8 as sort of a basic aperture for all of them. And you can see the results in the video. Now, the other thing I noticed is that the Summicron Leica 50mm at 2.0. 2.0 is the maximum aperture. It's absolutely fantastic. So now I know that if I want to use that lens to create a very specific type of portrait where I'm focusing on the eyes of the subject and then I let everything else go into blur, as long as I'm nailing the focus and as long as the eyes are on the same plane, because otherwise if I go like this, one will be already blurry, then I have a good situation. I can do it. The lens actually performed very well. Well, that is hardly a surprise because this lens, I have a copy from the 90s, from the early 90s, but this lens is sold today on a virtually unchanged version. It's almost exactly the same, and it retails for one prime at $2,400. So for a $2,400 lens, that I actually expect that lens to perform. So perfect. I actually verify that. Now I know that this lens works, and then I can use it. Then it's up to me to make it work and use the camera properly. Now, speaking of color, I noticed another thing. When I look at the images with the color swatches, when I see the images from the two cameras side by side, you know, the pictures I took with the Sony and the Canon in the same lighting condition with perfect white balance, the two cameras resolve colors in a very, very, very similar way. The differences are negligible, and that puts to rest the absurd discussion that I see often on the internet about the color science of Canon or Sony. When you have the same lighting and the two cameras have accurate white balance done with a proper chart or any kind of tool that you prefer to use. You can use an expo disc, which is I think what I used, or a gray card. But once you have the right white balance, the two colors, the two cameras render colors in a very similar way, which is another great benefit of having a absolute accurate chart. And so that to me puts absolutely no substance in the argument that there is a substantial change of colors between Sony and Canon. All right, so I want to stop at this point. Maybe I'll do another video, another tutorial about how to use the chart to calibrate the cameras. But for now, I hope this was a useful discussion. I think this chart should be part of every photographer's arsenal. It's extremely useful. Knowing the exact performance of my lenses to me is an incredibly useful information. So I hope this was useful. It was instructive. Please let me know with your comments. And again, I'm Paolo with Dreamlight Images from Charleston, South Carolina. Ciao.